AP Psychology, Chapter 9, Part 4, Memory. What we're going to do here is cite some ways that context can affect retrieval. Retrieval is sometimes aided by returning to the original context in which we experienced an event and encoded a thought, and can flood our memories with retrieval cues that lead to the target memory, and sometimes being in a context similar to one we've been in before, we may trick us into unconsciously retrieving the target memory. The result is feeling that we are reliving something that we have experienced before, a phenomenon known as deja vu. Scuba divers recall more words underwater if they learn the list underwater, while they recall more words on land if they learn that list on land. Deja vu means I've experienced this before. Cues from the current situation may unconsciously trigger retrieval from a similar experience. More than 50 surveys of the phenomenon of deja vu reveal that it decreases with age and increases with education. It's more common with persons who travel. They remember their dreams and have liberal political religious beliefs. Deja vu is most likely to be triggered by general physical contacts, although spoken word alone sometimes produce the illusion. Deja vu is experienced mainly when people are indoors, engaged in leisure activities, or relaxing and in the company of friends. Deja vu is relatively brief, about 10 to 30 seconds, and is more frequent in the evening than in the morning, and on the weekend than on the weekdays. Deja vu is responded to more positively than negatively, with people typically indicating they are surprised, curious, or confused. Since the 1800s, researchers have offered more than 30 scientifically plausible explanations of deja vu. The most promising describe the illusion as arising from biological dysfunction, divided perception, or implicit familiarity in the absence of explicit recollection. From the biological perspective, incoming sensory data follows several different pathways to higher processing centers of the brain. A neurochemical event that slightly alters transmission speeds in one pathway could lead to the illusion of deja vu. That is, a slight delay in the speed of one pathway relative to another could cause the brain to interpret this data as independent and separate copies of the same experience, even though the two impressions are only milliseconds off. Deja vu could also result from perceptual experience that is subjectively split into two parts. That is, fully processed perceptual experience that matches a minimal processed impression received moments earlier and could produce a strong feeling of familiarity. This disconnection between the two perceptual impressions could result from a physical distraction or even from a mental distraction, such as we momentarily retreat into our inner thoughts and reflections. The phenomenon of inattention blindness, in which people miss something that is right in front of them, demonstrates how perceptual experience can be split into two parts. A clearly visible item can be overlooked if one's attention is directed elsewhere. Even though we may be oblivious to this clearly visible stimulus, it still registers as demonstrated by implicit memory tests. Finally, deja vu may be a product of implicit familiarity without explicit recollection. For example, when we are in the setting that matches one that we have previously experienced as a young child, or read about in especially vivid literary description, we may have a feeling of familiarity but not explicit recollection of the source of this feeling. The example of seeing a lamp in your aunt's house that may be identical to the one that used to be at your friend's apartment. You may fail to recognize the object, yet experience an implicit sense of familiarity that generalizes to the entire situation. Or the living room of your friend's new apartment may elicit deja vu because the room's arrangement closely resembles the configuration of a living room you were in years before. So After learning to move a mobile by kicking, infants most strongly respond when retested in the same context rather than in a different context. Retrieval is sometimes aided by returning to the original context in which we experienced an event and encoded a thought. It can flood our memories with retrieval cues that lead to the target memory. Sometimes being in a context similar to ones we've been in before may trick us into unconsciously retrieving the target memory. Result is feeling that we are reliving something that we have experienced before. State-dependent memory is the tendency to recall information best in the same emotional or physiological state as the information was learned. Memories are somewhat mood congruent. While in a good or bad mood, we often retrieve memories consistent with that mood. Moods are also prime us to interpret others' behavior in ways consistent with our emotion. Change blindness occurs when people fail to detect changes in objects or scenes that occur over time. In, in their field of study, Levin and Simons had an experimenter ask a research participant on a college campus for directions. In the middle of the conversation, two men walked between them holding a door that temporarily hid the experimenter. Behind the door, the two experimenters changed places so that when the experimenter reappeared, a different person was asking for directions. Less than half, or only 7 of 15 of the participants noticed the change. Simons and Levin concluded that people typically encode features of the scene at an extremely shallow level, noting the general gist of the scene but a few of the specific details. They note successful change detection probably requires effortful encoding of precisely those features or properties that would distinguish the original from the changed object. Having noted that observers who showed change blindness were older adults, Simons and Levin hypothesized that older persons may have encoded the initial young experimenters simply as college students, whereas the college students may have encoded their peers at a more specific level. To test this hypothesis, the experimenters repeated the study, this time with attired as construction workers. They reasoned that the college students might now encode them categorically as construction workers and as a result demonstrate greater change blindness. Indeed, now only 4 of 12 students noted when different construction workers emerged from behind the door to ask directions. Shallow encoding that does not go beyond the categorical level produces a poor recollection of scene details and greater susceptibility to change blindness. In their recent review of the research on change blindness, Simons and Abdemar note how individual differences, expertise, and culture, as well as age, can affect change detection performance. For example, experts in American football are better able to detect meaningful changes in football scenes than those who are unfamiliar with the sport. Presumably, expertise guides attention when viewing images, thereby enhancing change detection's semantically meaningful changes. So now we're going to talk about why we should value our ability to forget and distinguish 3 general ways our memory fails us. The capacity to forget useless or out-of-date information is helpful. Because of this inability to forget, the Russian memory whiz S found it more difficult than others to think abstractly, to generalize, to organize, to evaluate. Without an ability to forget, we would be overwhelmed by our out-of-date and irrelevant information. Our memories fail us through forgetting, absent-mindedness, transience, and blocking, through the distortion of misattribution of suggestibility and bias, and through the intrusion persistence of unwanted memories. One explanation for forgetting is that we fail to encode information for entry into our memory system. Without effortful processing, much of what we sense we never notice to process. For example, although most people in the United States have probably looked at thousands of pennies, when tested on specific features, they have difficulty recognizing the real thing. Poor durability of stored memories lead to their decay. Ebbinghaus showed this with his forgetting curve. Memories may fade after storage. From his research on learning and retention, Ebbinghaus found that forgetting occurs rapidly at first and then levels off. This principle known as the forgetting curve. Storage decay may reflect a gradual fading of physical memory trace. Another possible explanation is that we simply can't retrieve the information. Bayrick showed a similar pattern of forgetting and retaining over 50 years using Spanish course students. Although the information is retained in the memory store, it cannot be accessed. The tip of the tongue phenomenon is a retrieval failure phenomenon. Given a cue, what makes blood cells red, the subject says the word begins with an H, we would say hemoglobin. Interference is learning some new information may disrupt retrieval of information. Retrieval failure can occur if we have too few cues to summon information from long-term memory. It may happen when an old information is incomplete for retrieval. In proactive interference, something we learned in the past interferes with our ability to recall something we have recently learned in the past interferes with our ability to recall with something we have recently learned. In retroactive interference, something we have recently learned interferes with something we have learned in the past. With this concept of repression, Sigmund Freud proposed our memories are self-censoring. To protect our self-concepts and to minimize anxiety, we may block from conscious painful memories and unacceptable impulses. In Freud's view, this motivated forgetting. Submerges memories but leaves them available for later retrieval. Memory researchers think that repression rarely, if ever, occurs. Freud's concept of repression raises the broader question of whether people can influence the content of their memories. Michael Anderson and Colin Green of the University of Oregon asked people to memorize a list of 50 simple pairs of words such as ordeal and roach. Research participants were then presented the first word and asked either to recall its pair or banish it from their minds for 4 seconds. The volunteers were asked to suppress the second word between 0 and 16 times. Anderson and Green found that volunteers were much less able to recall words that had been repressed many times, even when they were promised money to remember. Obviously, word pairs do not have emotional content of many suppressed memories. Still, the experimental results does not have emotional content of many suppressed memories. Still, the experimental results suggest Anderson indicate that there must exist a collection of executive control functions with people influencing the content of their own memories. Martin Conway of the University of Bristol agrees that the results are important. Their methods offer a way of exploring the underlying mechanisms and may ultimately shed on how repression comes about. Conway intends to extend the experiment by doing brain imaging to determine whether inhibition occurs. Anderson's interest in memory control was sparked by the inhibit the memories of the perpetrator is trusted caregiver than if he or she is a stranger. Presumably, the known abuser is providing a constant memory cue, so the victim may have to actively suppress the memory in order to go forward in life. In general, memory inhibition may be adaptive. It may be counterproductive to remember yesterday's parking spot or the name of someone you met last year. So, memory construction. While tapping our memories, we filter or fill in the missing pieces with information to make our recall more coherent. Misinformation effect is incorporating misleading information into one's memory of an event.